Yeah, guys, this should be a little shorter than the last video. I apologise it was so long. I'm just trying to, again, like I say, put these together and get them out. This one's a little bit more focused on regional and devolved government. I know I touched it on the previous video, but it is an important topic, and it hasn't come up really in the past 2 years. And devolution's a massive part of political participation. So please pay attention. Please pay attention to it. All right. Right, key terms, what do we need to know? Well, devolved powers, they are the powers transferred by the UK to governments, to the devolved governments, like Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, right? Make sure you know them, because there are huge questions, even in current politics, around them. And it makes sense for the exam board to try and link that together for the current crop. So again, make sure you're aware independence movements and how these devolved powers are used. Then you've got the reserve powers. Now, I touched on this a little bit in the previous video, but this is where the UK keeps powers for itself. Sorry, the UK government, so Westminster, keeps powers for itself. So that's why Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales can't go around declaring wars on people, because that power belongs to central government. Okay. And you've got the devolved governments themselves. This is where this is the parliaments, the Scottish Parliament, Welsh Parliament, and the Parliament in Northern Ireland. Okay, so make sure you're familiar with those three terms, and they shouldn't be a surprise to you at this point, but note them down if you are unsure. Right, a little bit of background. I'm just going to read through this and then I'll add to it as we go. But from 97, the momentum for devolution in the UK increased. In 98, a referendum was held and Scotland voted for a Scottish Parliament with the authority to have tax-varying and law-making powers. The Welsh people have also voted for an assembly and power over policy areas. The Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland was followed by a referendum in 1998, which re-established devolved government in Northern Ireland. So that might not mean anything to you, but really, to sum that up, that is a movement towards more devolution. So when you're thinking of those questions, you need to be already thinking in your head, what are the benefits of more devolution, what are the negatives of more devolution? Okay, that's where the big question will come from. Not a lot on Wales, but things like the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland is really important, because this basically ended the troubles between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, and that devolved government allows them some autonomy, that's some power, but the real focus is Scotland. That's always been one of the focuses in this question, because who's the most dominant party in the Scottish Parliament? The SNP, Scottish Nationalist Party. Right, again, this is going over a little bit what I've already said. You've got the national assemblies in each of our devolved governments, and power comes from the UK government, Westminster. So Westminster gives those governments their power. Right? So don't get it confused with the federal system in America and Germany, where power was already in those states. That's why, and it never came from Washington or Berlin. So there was no real. So basically, Washington, Berlin, they can't take power back from their states in Germany and USA. However, the UK government can. It can take those powers back. They need a referendum to do it, where everyone votes on it. But in theory, they do have that power. Right, transfers of powers. Again, just essentially, Scottish Parliament and National Assembly for Wales took responsibility for their powers in 99. Northern Ireland, again, in the 2nd of December 99. Again, just a little bit background knowledge on how these powers are being transferred. I think, again, the main focus of these questions is going to be advantages and for and against arguments. But again, I want you to be thinking about this when we look at because I know we weren't able to go into this in loads of detail in lesson, but just think about how more powers are increasing as time's gone on. So essentially, the state of devolution has gone up. That's really what you can take away from this. So one argument you could say is increased devolution inevitable? Is it always going to go up because of things that have happened in 99 and then 2002? Right, a little bit about the independent powers themselves. So Scottish Parliament, they're known by the name of Holyrood. It's in Edinburgh, democratically elected. 129 members, could be a one marker, who are elected on a 4-year term. Scottish Parliament has the powers to pass legislation within its areas of devolved powers. That's important. So they can basically govern themselves for what they've been allowed by the UK government. All right, and it's the same process. It has to go through their parliamentary system. The majority party or a coalition parties, if there is a majority, forms a government under the First Minister. So, you know, the SNP have just lost their First Minister to who is actually part of a coalition. And now I'll have to double check on that. Actually, I'm not up to date on that, but they've just elected a new First Minister, and they'd have to make a deal to ensure they gain a majority in Parliament. Just a note again on Scotland, just be again, Scottish Nationalist Party, their main priority is independence. Okay, so you know that makes you think they essentially want to secede from the United Kingdom. So keep that in mind. Wales itself, there are 60 elected members in the Welsh Assembly. The majority party or a coalition of parties. If no single party wins, again, it's the same principle that you should already know. You win more than half, you get a majority, you have control. If not, you have a minority and you need to form a coalition. Works in a similar way. They have the devolved powers to run their assembly in the way they like. Plaid Cymru has a strong kind of following. They're like the Welsh party, but Labour have got a lot of influence there, as you can see with the little graphic. But Conservatives as well. Northern Ireland. Oh, that's a good point actually as well. Remember, in these devolved governments, you've got your traditional parties of the Westminster, Labour, Conservatives. Because when we look at 650 constituencies, that includes Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, to get MPs from all over. Remember as well, in Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, they have both a seat in their assemblies and the UK Parliament. The only MPs who don't have a separate seat is the English MPs. Right, so 108 in Northern Ireland. You've got a First Minister and a Deputy First Minister who are elected. They must stand for election jointly, and to be elected, they must have cross-community support by the parallel consent formula. That's stuff you're not probably going to remember. It's just a little bit of background. If you're interested in it, please have a look. Again, this means majority of both members who have designated themselves nationalists and those who have designated themselves unionists, and a whole assembly must vote in favour. So it's all about uniting Northern Ireland. Right, what I'm going to get into is just a little bit more. Make sure you do read the bottom bits, just a little bit on the Good Friday Agreement, which you know, was to end the Troubles under the Labour government. England, again, don't forget England itself. This devolution goes to the English regions. You've got local referendums, local councils. This comes into the unitary authorities that we have, or directly elected mayors. We touched upon that last time. It's another form of devolution, remember. So remember, local councils are devolution. You know, sorting out parking bays and parking spots and bins and stuff like that. Right, so each of the devolved parties have differing powers due to the degree of devolution they were granted by the Westminster Parliament. So their powers, again, like I've said, come from central government. So Northern Irish Parliament had been around from 21 to 72, when Westminster basically took direct control. So it did have a tradition of devolved powers. Scotland voted in its own referendum for a parliament and tax raising powers, so it's been granted quite a high degree of devolution. Should just make a note of the levels of devolution these devolved governments have, and the Welsh Assembly has been given again increased power, but the demand for Welsh devolution is actually quite small. Loyal. the Welsh, but they've been Wales has really been part of English society really since Edward the First when he invaded and built those castles. But I won't talk too much about the history stuff. Right. Okay. I did want to touch upon English votes for English laws. I'm not sure how much of a focus this would be now. It used to be a big thing, but I've talked about it a little bit in my class. But essentially, it goes back to, when I'm talking about the devolved powers, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. Well, English MPs don't have a parliament. So remember when I said, for example, Scottish MPs, they'll have a seat in the Scottish Parliament and the English Parliament and UK Parliament. Sorry, the English MPs only have a seat in UK Parliament. So technically, they can vote on English laws, and this is where this comes from. Before I get into the scrapping of it, like I said, the whole argument comes down to the English MPs get frustrated because they think, right, when the Scottish MPs want to vote on issues in Scotland, English MPs can't vote on it because English MPs don't have a seat in the Scottish Parliament. Okay. Whereas if there's an English issue, Scottish MPs and Welsh MPs and Northern Irish MPs, they come to the UK Parliament to vote on it. So the English MPs are like, well, what? How does that happen? How's that fair? So they basically say either one, there should be an English Parliament, or two, English votes for English laws. Meaning, if there's an English specific law for England, then Scottish MPs, Welsh MPs, Northern Irish MPs shouldn't have a say. There's issues with this. One being precedence and what it could lead to. If you allow English votes for English laws, Scots and the Welsh and Northern Irish, they might feel, right, so if we're suddenly not allowed to vote on a law in the UK Parliament, then what's to say you might just advance this law to, well, only English MPs can make specific trade deals, or only English MPs can declare wars. So it could lead to something further. That's the fear. It's almost like you get the English MPs rising above the other MPs. Okay. The alternative is, if there's an English Parliament, it kind of limits the use of UK Parliament. What's the use of Westminster? Would it just be sat empty most of the time? So these are kind of issues that are going on. It was eventually scrapped, this whole idea. The House of Commons approved the government's motion to abolish English votes for English laws, with the government claiming it would remove unnecessary complication. The SNP kind of described it as humiliation for ministers. Conservative MPs were unhappy. They believed England deserved better. Again, Labour MPs saying that it really undermined democracy. So it was a legitimate argument. It could be an 8 marker. Do be aware of it. And again, I'll just leave this on to give you an idea of, or in more detail. I kind of talked about it a little bit more in the last slide that covered all this, but just be aware. The graphic above there just gives you the whole kind of process of this law and laws in general. I know we kind of simplify it and say the government will create a law, put it to Parliament, and then it goes through, it's debated, checked by Lords, and given the royal assent. There is a little bit more structure to that. And lastly, I'll just leave you with this, just an idea of the devolved powers. Okay, now went a bit longer than I wanted to, but again, hopefully you found that useful.